Hello and welcome back to History Revealed. So I just debated a pro-Palestinian activist called Chris Kunzler about the current war in Israel. Now he represents a lot of what's wrong with the West. He was born in the West, received all the blessings of the West, yet despises the society and culture that he lives in. And he resorted to the usual tactics. Comment below how many times he used the word racist, and also look out for his great accusation against American soldiers. That's a good one to see.
So we are streaming, we are live. I am joined today by Chris Kunzler and History Revealed. These two have been going back and forth over the last few months, especially since the October 7th attack. Um, History Revealed is a history and military content creator on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and he's got over 200,000 followers. Chris Kunzler is studying a master's at Exeter University under lecturers like Ilan Pape. Over the past year, he's been making TikToks about Palestine and politics and more generally. So for you both, we are going to be having a discussion on this topic over the next hour. I'll be letting you guys know just how much time you've got left, and we can get started. Would anybody like to be the gentleman and volunteer to go first?
I
I'll
don't
pick.
really mind.
I'll pick. We'll go for Chris. So we'll start with the general question of what do you think is your current opinion on the current general state in Israel and Palestine? About 3 minutes each.
Well, on the one hand, you have a settler colonial fascistic apartheid state that is currently waging a genocide against the population inside the Gaza Strip. Even the International Court of Justice, which has a rather rigid definition of genocide, in my opinion, and would not be what I would claim to be exclusively what genocide is, has found it to be plausible that Israel is committing genocide there. So this is kind of my diagnosis of the current situation, that Israel is a settler colony, which means that it is motivated by the logic of elimination, which is the removal, extermination, and destruction of the Palestinian people. And it is currently trying to carry out that goal in the most violently spectacular fashion that it has ever been allowed. We've seen it destroy capitals before in Beirut. However, nothing on this scale, where human beings are just being slaughtered en masse, over 12,000 children, 28,000 people more generally, and likely maybe thousands more who are buried under the rubble. So basically, what my opinion is that Palestine deserves to be free, and the people who live there deserve much better than they're currently getting from the Israeli state. And that the current manifestation of the Israeli state as a Zionist entity, which is Jewish supremacist and wishes to establish Jewish supremacy everywhere in historic Palestine, is untenable. And the only answer is the fall of the Zionist entity and the establishment of something much better that can bring the existence or will to existence a binational state of both peoples.
Okay, thanks, Chris. History.
Yeah, so my opinion, we first need to look at what actually happened on October the 7th. So what happened on October the 7th? Yes, we know around 1,200 people were killed and over 200 taken hostage. But let's be clear what it was. It was a culmination of what is a centuries-old ideology of Islamic jihadism. The sadistic violence that took place was just unbelievable, and the fact we got to see so much of it on camera is truly incredible. So just look at what happened. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, other factions burst into Israel, go into kibbutzes, towns, slaughter entire families, kidnap others, the bodies are mutilated, torture occurs. And what they're doing as they carry out these atrocities? They're enjoying themselves. Just watch the recordings. They're shouting Allahu Akbar in celebration. And when you heard the phone call of that boy, God only knows how old he was, when he rang his mother and his father to say how proud he was, how excited he was, that he'd killed a Jew with his own hands, killed 10 with his own hands, killed the husband and wife. What you have here is an ideology, an extremely violent one, that has plagued the world for God knows how many centuries now. And what we saw on October the 7th was the latest opportunity they had to carry out this murderous ideology in real time. And in 1947, when the discussion was taking place, just the discussion of a Jewish state, the head of the Arab League said that if a Jewish state is declared, there will be a war of extermination. It will be spoken of like the Mongol massacres and the Crusades, and that martyrs would come from all over the world to win their martyrdom for the cause of Palestine. And what we saw on October the 7th was the latest iteration of that. This is a war that's gone on for over 70 years now. There is only one goal for the Arabs and the radical Muslims who are fighting Israel, and that is Israel's total destruction and the genocide of the Jewish people who live there. And that's what Israel's fighting now, and it has to carry on with the war in Gaza and wipe out Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the ideology that it's fighting.
Okay, that was nice around 3 minutes. Chris, you want to respond?
So almost instantaneously, you decided to parrot like Douglas Murray's talking point of, wow, these people filmed themselves enjoying what they did. I mean, the scale and the amount of videos that there are of Israeli soldiers doing exactly the same thing, except overtly speaking about genocide when they're doing it. They're not just screaming Allahu Akbar. These people are like, let's smite Amalek, let's destroy them, let's wipe them from the earth, proudly whooping as they destroy universities, civilian buildings. So all of these arguments that this is some kind of or somehow derived specifically from Islam don't seemingly make sense, because surely you would derive the same conclusion from Judaism, no? That they've interpreted the scripture to mean it's okay to wipe people off the face of the earth, and, you know, that's just how it is.
Well, that's a complete misunderstanding of what the threat of Amalek is.
Well, I mean, but the problem is however I understand it, there's a wiping out of Palestinian people currently occurring.
Well, there is.
Even the ICJ. Well, I mean, even the ICJ says it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide there. And I will remind you that that definition of genocide is very rigid, because it doesn't really include the cultural aspect of genocide, which is incredibly important, in my opinion. Wiping out a people's culture is tantamount to genocide. When it was done to the Kurdish people in Iraq, it's disgusting there, and it's exactly the same thing that's currently happening in Gaza. Look at the destruction of historic mosques, historic buildings, and then you even mix in epistemicide. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but like the destruction of knowledge that's there, burning down antique shops, burning down universities. And these are all things that have been proudly live streamed by Israelis, which are all inherently genocidal acts. So the idea that, oh, well, I've just misinterpreted Amalek, it doesn't matter. It's very obvious how the soldiers are interpreting it, how the song Harbu Darbu interprets it, that it's about, okay, you can wipe people off the earth. That's what it is. It's like, fundamentally, what you are talking about is an imaginary genocide that is currently not happening against Jewish people, in comparison to, no, well, there's actually not one happening in Palestine right now, when there is, and even the ICJ thinks so.
No, the ICJ doesn't.
It says plausible.
Oh, okay. If it said there was one happening, it would demand a cessation of hostilities immediately. It didn't do that. Now, moving on to any silly claim of genocide or whatever else. Okay, John Spencer, who is probably the world's foremost expert on urban warfare, has said that the IDF has done more to prevent civilian casualties than any other army in history. You've got to understand the operation that's going on right now. What you have is a metropolis, an extended urban centre that is the Gaza Strip. We say Gaza, and people think of Gaza as one city. It's actually several cities. And you've had this jihadi group, Hamas, who for years now has been setting up its infrastructure, digging tunnels underneath civilian targets deliberately, turning any civilian building it can, homes, mosques, schools, hospitals, into military assets. And this is what the IDF has got to deal with. And in spite of that, in spite of the massive complexity of this operation, what have they done? They've done things like make phone calls, drop leaflets, send messages, give out maps, giving away military information, saying where they'll operate, giving away that element of surprise, all to save civilian lives. Yeah, no other army in history has done anything on that scale to try and protect civilian life. Go on.
No, I won't interrupt.
Okay, go on.
It just doesn't excuse it, because, like, fundamentally they may be saying these things, but I'm pretty sure the US found that like 50% of their ammunition that had been, or munitions that had been dropped on the Gaza Strip, were dumb bombs, so they're not very active as well.
No, and what? Okay, it's the most ridiculous talking point I've heard people say. Dumb bombs doesn't mean inaccurate. It just means it's not a guided munition. a dumb munition can still be accurate if you hit the target. And that's what they've been doing. There's various methods, triangulation, so on and so forth, that they use to hit targets accurately. So what that they're using dumb bombs?
There's an example where that fundamentally is not true. They did it on Christmas Eve, I believe, to a refugee camp where they were like, oh, sorry, we used the wrong type of munition. And also the element which you've just completely removed from here is the plentiful evidence of Israeli snipers shooting innocent people holding white flags. There's absolutely no explanation for that. If there's the case of, oh, they care so much about civilians, why are the people inside Gaza enjoying so much what they're doing? Why are they burning down civilian homes with absolutely no need to do that? You can say these things about leaflets, but these clearly weren't defenses that the ICJ found plausible, because even as Israel brought them up and you just went, no, well, they would have called for a ceasefire immediately. Granted, they didn't call for a ceasefire, but their words are incredibly strong. They read out the statements of people like Yoav Gallant, who made inherently genocidal statements.
No, he didn't.
Netanyahu.
No, he didn't.
You're just saying, no, he didn't.
I'll tell you what he said.
You're having a meltdown.
Yeah, okay. He said he compared Hamas to animals, or human animals, not Palestinian people. He was very clear about that.
Okay, then let's just choose Herzog then, where he said there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. And I don't think that's the only thing that Gallant has said that's inherently genocidal, because after that statement, did he not say there will be no water, no fuel, no anything into Gaza, which would seem to mean that he's not talking about just Hamas, because Hamas aren't the only people who drink water, no? Or am I mistaken on that front?
Ask Hamas what they drink. He cut off Israel's supplies to Gaza. Gaza has its own internal water supply and its own power supply. That's what he was discussing.
Yeah, but Israel supplies a considerable amount, because Gaza
small amount.
Gaza simply doesn't have the ability to exist on its own. You know, the UN said it would be unlivable by 2020. And if you go back to the UN reports from the 1950s, they talk about the fact of, well, Gaza would struggle to sustain the population that already existed there. When you mix in the fact that a mass amount of Palestinians were ethnically cleansed to there by Israel in 1948, you have an untenable situation. As much as you may will it to be that Gaza was just turned into this horrible place by Islamic crazy people, Gaza was on the slide a long time ago, and the Israeli occupation really exacerbated that from 1967 onwards. That's right. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, let's go back to 1948. You mentioned that, right? So, why were there so many refugees? In 1947, there was a partition plan. There was an offer of a Jewish and an Arab state. The Arabs refused. The Jews accepted it. There could have been no war, no refugees whatsoever, had the Arabs accepted that plan. But they not only rejected it, they started a war. First inside the British Mandate of Palestine, and then 5 Arab armies invaded with the express goal to wipe out Israel. And they lost. And in the process of them losing, many refugees were created, purely of their own arrogance and stupidity for starting a war. And who took over Gaza? Well, we could focus on the West Bank as well, but let's focus on Gaza for now. Gaza ended up in Egypt's hands. Did Egypt go to any length to create a Palestinian state? Of course they didn't. They allowed Gaza to be used as a base for Fedayeen attacks against Israel.
Going back to your point about 1948 history revealed, I assume that you are someone who believes immigration to the UK is too high. Am I correct?
What the hell has immigration to the UK got
do you think it's too high, that there are too many people who come to this country?
I've not thought about it one little bit.
Okay. Well, you know, a lot of people in this country have a very strong reaction to immigration. It's perhaps one of the biggest debates that this country really has currently. Can you imagine if instead of just people immigrating, that there was some Muslim nation that was sponsoring a massive amount of Muslims to come to the UK with the express intent of establishing their own state on a percentage of the UK? You simply wouldn't accept that, because territorial expansionism always brings with it warfare. And also, on 1948 and the partition plan, you're like, why didn't the Palestinians just accept?
I know
Under
why they
this
didn't
logic,
accept.
why wouldn't they? Well, it seems that you don't. Because why would they want to accept this massive amount of immigrants that came to their country when they'd been clear, we don't want no two-state solution. We want a binational state where we're both allowed to exist here how it already is. Yet the thing is you just assume that the UN had the right to just impose from the outside when 70% of the population who were indigenous to that land, not the new immigrants that had come, had said, no, we don't want that. It's not fair to externally impose something and then chastise the people who actually live there for not accepting it. Because ultimately, it's just a situation that's not fair on Palestinians.
Okay. First of all, that comparison to the UK is ludicrous because no Palestinian state existed. Sorry to burst your bubble or any other pro-Palestinians. There was never a Palestinian state. There was never a kingdom of Palestine with a king of Palestine or an emperor of Palestine. It existed just as much as Narnia and Westeros did. It was before Israel was created, the British Empire controlled it. Before that, the Ottoman Empire, obviously capital in Istanbul. The Mamluks from Egypt controlled it before. It was always the property of someone else's empire. So there was no country that was being invaded. There was the possession of various imperial territories. Britain received the mandate in Palestine specifically to create a Jewish state. It was all legal what was going on. The Jews
No, it wasn't, Mr. Revealed. No, it wasn't. Because what does the Balfour Declaration say? That it will not harm the rights and the wills or something of the local population. And the King Crane Commission, only 1 year later, organized by America, or 2 years later, sorry, in 1919, quite literally found that it couldn't be established because the local people were not happy with it being done. You cannot simply sit there and pretend that Palestinians had some bizarre reaction to an external imposition and the dispossession that they experienced. If you read the work of Kanafani Ghassan, about the revolt of 1936, it's very clear that people weren't happy about being dispossessed by foreign people who were coming in, buying the land, and then banning Palestinians from working on it, and also enclosing spaces that had previously been common land. So this very idea that it was just, oh, well, no one possessed it and this and that, there were still people who lived on that land.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely they were.
Israel, all of these nation states didn't exist in time immemorial. This is a mistake of nationalism that there was like a Britain as we know it now many years ago. No, there wasn't. Palestine was a thing. It had local notables, and for the longest time, there were people who just existed there. In fact, it even sent a delegation to the Ottoman Parliament. So the very idea that there was just nothing there is racist and it is unfair. And it is a colonialist trope that is a
That wasn't long.
It was a colonialist trope that is a justification. Well, history revealed, when you are racist, it's very easy for me to call you racist because you are. You're being racist. You're saying, oh, because they weren't like us, they don't deserve the land and it wasn't theirs. It was just possessed by other empires.
Which it
that's
was.
Not how it works.
That's exactly how it works. It was possessed by other empires.
But what does that mean? It just because they were possessed by other empires doesn't mean that the local people there should exist in that way. No other state got subsumed apart from Kurdistan, really, and I guess Baluchistan maybe, but no other state was just taken away from an ethnic group in such a way, or a national group, not an ethnic group, rather.
Okay, it wasn't taken. The way you make it describe, like it was taken away. Ben Gurion and various other Jews, I mean, Ben Gurion was the first prime minister, we'll use him as the best example, openly said, we want to share this land between us, and in the Declaration of Independence promised the rights of Arabs. They still launched the war to exterminate Israel. They lost the war, the Jewish state was created. There could have been no refugees. It could have all been avoided. And Chris, do you want to remind the audience what the Jordanians did when they got their hands on Jerusalem in 1948 and 1949?
They stopped halfway through because there was some kind of agreement with the Israelis.
Well, that's where the ceasefire lines ended up. What did they do with this? East Jerusalem that they captured. What did they do to the Jewish population there?
Remove them? I don't know.
Exactly. They ethnically cleansed the entire eastern half of Jerusalem of the Jewish population and destroyed every synagogue they could get their hands on. And the ones they didn't destroy turned them into stables or waste dumps, whatever it may be. So, and what happened with the Arabs who decided to remain in Israel? They became full citizens. And
come on, bro. That's just It's just untrue.
To
It's
this,
not true.
it's
And
not,
also his
okay,
his
I hadn't finished. I
okay.
appreciate you. No. Okay. The Arabs became full citizens of Israel. To this day, they serve on the Supreme Court, they serve in the army, they enjoy all the rights that the other Jewish and non-Jewish alike citizens of Israel have. Who's living in Gaza? How many Jews are living in Gaza? How many would be allowed in a future Palestinian state? The answer is zero. When Jordan had, like I said, when Jordan had the West Bank, expelled every single Jew from Jerusalem. They massacred the people in a place called Kfar Etzion and expelled the survivors. Not a single Jew remained in any of the territory captured by the Arabs in 1948. That was true ethnic cleansing. But go on.
So sorry, what does the king of Jordan and the Hashemite kingdom's actions have to do with Palestine? I don't like Jordan. I don't like the fact that they're a dictatorship, an authoritarian monarchy. It seems to me that you just juxtapose Palestinians against Israelis as kind of like an orientalized other, where the Palestinians are inherently evil and part of this massive conglomerate of Arabs who just all get together to do evil things to Jewish people. Whereas on the other hand, there's no ethnic cleansing when it comes to Palestine. When it comes to the Palestinians, in spite of the fact that there's very much a wealth of evidence that 750,000 people were expelled. 1/3 of Israeli Jews still in 1960 lived in Palestinians' houses, not just on the land, in houses of Palestinians. 10 years after the Nakba, 1/3 lived in those houses. And you say, oh, there was no ethnic cleansing. The core difference is you are trying to bring in Jordan, an example of a kingdom that doesn't really have anything to do with the pro-Palestinian movement, because in fact, the Jordanian regime shares security information and heavily collaborates with Israel.
Why
in comparison to, on the other hand, why might that be? Because they want to be in the American sphere of influence because it's inherently better than being in the Iranian one. It's just much more beneficial. I'm sorry, but that's how it is.
Okay.
It's funny because you juxtapose Islam against, but the sort of like nexus of Western aligned Islamic states are some of the fucking worst of them all. Saudi Arabia in particular, you know, crucifying people, running around bombing, using proxies, denying democracy, murdering Khashoggi, generally having the most reactionary form of Islam. But in your criticism, it's only ever states that do something with Palestine. But the thing is these states are all much more aligned with Israel. The reason they stopped in 1948 was literally because they had an agreement. I don't know if you know, but Golda Meir, the Israeli future prime minister, actually dressed up as an old Arab man and went to Jordan to meet King Abdullah.
I did know about Golda Meir speaking to the King of Jordan. I do know that many pro-Palestinian historians have completely misrepresented what went on. But put that to one side. What you just said about sort of the Palestinians and sort of the Arabs being some conglomeration, well, actually in 1948, they were. They all joined together to try and destroy Israel, and they failed. And then in 1967, they joined together, okay, slightly less, Syria, Jordan, Egypt. Lebanon stayed out of that one. The PLO got involved as well. They were calling for Israel's destruction, and they lost. They wanted to destroy Israel and got beaten. So I don't know why you're trying to sort of make this sort of artificial distinction, because the Palestinian cause has been readily taken up by, well, at least in rhetoric, has been taken up by these other Arab countries. Of course, we all know they're in it for themselves. Had they won, then Syria would have annexed land. Egypt did take over Gaza, and Jordan took over the West Bank. And we weren't even discussing Saudi Arabia. Yes, Saudi Arabia is a horrible country. It's a shame. It's a shame we have to ally with it, given its, I say we being Britain, given it's fighting an equally horrible regime, or certainly more horrible regime in Iran, and then the Houthis in Yemen. You don't always get the nice choices. It would be great if we could drop Saudi Arabia. I'd love it if we could do that.
Why can't we, I kind of wanted to not just talk about Saudi Arabia, but let's actually, first of all, why is Iran more evil than Saudi Arabia? Can you just explain that to me?
Well, in terms of the destabilization and the goals they're pursuing all over the Middle East in their
goals?
Well, I was about to, if you let me finish, funding Hezbollah, funding Hamas, funding the Houthis, all with the aim of destroying Israel, and attacking Western interests all over not just the region but the world. You are aware of the 1994, the bombing of the Jewish center in Argentina. You're aware of that?
No, not really.
Interesting. The worst terrorist attack in Argentinian history, carried out by Iran and Hezbollah. I'll give you a second.
But the point would be that all of those proxies, yeah, maybe they're not the best in the world, but like as I said in my Houthi video, which you simply seem to be unable to understand, that is a group with legitimate local interests in Yemen. It's not just been implanted there by Iran, and much of their support for the Houthis is actually much more rhetorical. They didn't just create the Houthis to wage war against the West or Saudi Arabia. The Houthis, as I said, were a local group with their own interests. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, has denied democracy in Bahrain. They linked up with the UAE for the Gulf Shield forces. They support Sisi in Egypt, who killed 1,000 people in a singular day. And they're one of the key backers of him. And the UAE as well, who's part of the sort of GCC nexus. They support the RSF in Sudan heavily. So this is why it's so funny, because you say that Iran has all of these really dangerous goals, like destroying Israel. But what about Saudi Arabia? What about Saudi Arabia's goals that are all like, okay, let's not let anyone have democracy across the Middle East. We want a Middle East that's stable and works for us. And we can export our atrocities. We can do whatever we want. But anyone else who's against us, they're just evil and they're just bad. Because the funny thing is Saudi Arabia is less democratic than Iran. It has a more regressive or more reactionary and aggressive form of Islam. And finally, it does exactly the same thing. Yeah, it does. Wahhabism is the most reactionary form of Islam, definitely. I mean, there's actually probably others, but in terms of mainstream, it's definitely more than 12 Shiism.
It's a tough competition. They're all pretty crap.
I mean, you are a racist, aren't you? Because you just hate Islam. Like that's what this boils down to.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
You do hate Islam. Come on. Admit it.
I'll tell you what I hate: Islamic terrorists. There you go.
What about Jewish terrorists? Do you hate them?
Sure.
Do you think they exist?
I'm sure they do.
So, in your opinion, basically, Islam is this.
Do you think Islamic terrorists exist?
Of course, people do bad things and people pervert ideologies in every single way. But the point being that you can't just generalize that to every single group, that they are motivated solely by, oh, we want to kill people, because it's not proper history.
But what
you're doing is just putting your thing. What do you mean? What do you mean, though?
I'll tell you what I mean. So the Houthis. Okay, you know what? For the audience who maybe doesn't know, I think Chris knows. Yeah, their motto includes death to America, death to Israel, and curse upon the Jews. Now, is that not clear enough for people? And in case you wanted more evidence of that, their founder, I believe his name was Mohammed al-Houthi, openly talked about how Jews were corrupting the world. They were this malign influence on the world, and how he thought they might have been behind 9/11. He even suggested that America Bin Laden was in a hotel and America was paying for it. That was what he suggested about 9/11. They are absolutely rotten to the core with their ideology. It's a violent extremist ideology, and it covers so many of these groups: Hamas, Hezbollah. They openly call for jihad, they openly call for murder, and they would not hesitate 1 second to do it. And the events of October the 7th showed us exactly what they will do when they have the chance.
But if we go back to October the 7th, Israel is an apartheid state. I know you're going to sit here and be like, no, it's not. But practically the law of return, I think even Mark Regev said it in an interview a few months ago where he went, what they say, I think Tamir Pardo said it. He said, what they say is factually true, but because they won't let us annex the West Bank, effectively we have to have de facto apartheid. The fact of the matter is that Palestinians don't have the same freedom of movement. They don't have the same legal rights. And more generally, they're just discriminated against in a way that amounts to apartheid. And the fact of the matter is Amnesty says it, B'Tselem says it, wealth of scholars, I think over 700 signed an open letter before October the 7th. And that's only a minute amount. I think the majority of scholars would actually agree that this is an apartheid state, and one that has reached levels that South Africa never saw, because never once did South Africa openly genocide, this many people.
Okay, I love how you cite Amnesty and B'Tselem. B'Tselem, in case people don't know, is a far-left Israeli NGO, completely disreputable, who's in the past, one of their most senior researchers was a Holocaust denier who expressed his admiration for Hitler. A guy, if you want to look him up, called Atef Abu Rub is his name. Really, completely disreputable organization. But we'll put all that to one side. In terms of movement restrictions, now, there are more movement restrictions than there used to be. So, for example, after the Six-Day War, there really wasn't much in terms of movement restrictions for either Jews or Arabs. And I'll point that out, that Jewish Israelis are not allowed to go to Ramallah or Jenin or the various population centers controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Now, obviously, Gaza, obviously, we don't need to go into that; they can't go there. Before the first Intifada, it was relatively open. So Arabs would go and work and visit Israel. I'm talking about Arabs from Gaza or the West Bank. Jews could go to Gaza and did go. They could even hitchhike there. They could, if they wanted to buy their vegetables in Ramallah, they could do so. And there wasn't peace by any means, but there was workable arrangements, and the Palestinian economy and society absolutely benefited. Then, as the terrorism increased, so did the restrictions increase. That's why there are restrictions.
What else happened in 1967? History revealed.
Well, there was the many attacks against Jews in Arab countries
History revealed. I think you're missing the biggest thing about the West Bank at that point. Didn't Israel start illegally moving people into the West Bank, which is illegal under international law in that period? And that has been one of the biggest reasons for the infringement of the rights of the Palestinians, the increased numbers of Jewish people that have been imported there illegally, and make it so that Palestinian existence is almost impossible there, where they are given more access to water, more access to generally just being able to move around, money, investment, all of these things are inherently beneficial. So, and even to the point where these settlements dump their waste on Palestinian villages. So this idea that, oh, well, the terror attacks are responsible for it. Israel also started increasing its territorial expansion after 1967. So you've kind of removed a key part of the context to be like, oh, well, they had freedoms. But even in that short period up until the 1970s, they were subject to a different legal system. There's a really excellent report by the Sunday Times from 1977, which cites the Israeli ambassador as lying to the United Nations. No surprises there. But it says Palestinians are subject to a horrific torture and abuse regime by the Israeli military that the Jewish people wouldn't have been. So this idea, oh, well, it was just magical in 1967 and then they started doing terror attacks and that's how we got here, is completely ridiculous. It's completely farcical.
Okay, let's start in 1967. How did Israel come to control the West Bank?
They illegally annexed it. Or de facto annexed it. De facto.
Oh, okay, fine. What was the series of events that led to Israel moving against Jordan in the West Bank?
Egypt launched a war. And it's like, okay, Egypt did that, but it still doesn't mean that Palestinians have to suffer. Again, in 1948, you get this like gleeful smile where you're like, yeah, they won wars. But wars have real consequences for civilians.
Absolutely they do.
And ones that don't deserve it. Palestinians did not deserve to be ethnically cleansed from their homes. You smile about it and think it's fun, but it's not fun, history revealed. This is why we're at where we're at today. This is why October the 7th happened. You do not have a modicum of sympathy for Palestinians because, as I said, you are a racist Islamophobe. And what you believe is somehow that these people's suffering is just justified because they lost a war. They didn't launch that war. They weren't the people who chose a colonial power to come into their land. They weren't the people who chose that Britain was just going to help the Jewish people develop there, but they had to pay the price of people like you and I who were anti-Semitic to Jewish people in Europe. And yet you sit there and you're like, oh, well, no, it was this thing, it was that thing. Fundamentally, the structure of dispossession existed long before any of these wars.
Okay. You're monologuing. Let me respond. Okay. In 1967, the reason that Israel took over the West Bank and it asked Jordan not to attack, it said, we will not attack East Jerusalem or the West Bank if you do not attack us first. It was already engaged on a two-front war with Egypt and Syria. Jordan ignored that, and Jordan attacked. They shelled West Jerusalem and started attacking Israeli positions. Israel counterattacked and took over the West Bank. Now, Jordan had annexed the West Bank illegally. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a concept in international law called uti possidetis juris. Now, what that means is that the borders of an emerging state are the previous administrative boundaries of the existing territory before. So when various colonies in South America gained independence, then that's when it applied there. So the new nation inherited the borders of the previous colony. Same with the USSR when the USSR collapsed. So Ukraine, for example, inherited the Ukrainian Socialist Republic's borders. We could have a whole conversation about that, but that's a different one. Now, when Israel emerged, Israel was the only state to emerge from the British Mandate. The only one. There was no Palestinian state, and Jordan invaded the territory in the east, and Gaza and Egypt invaded Gaza in the west. So when Israel counterattacked, took the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, it reclaimed the inherited borders of the British Mandate. No illegal occupation, no Palestinian land.
Come on, lad. History revealed. Pretty much under international law, even the UK government will argue that Israel is an occupying power. It even argues that they occupy Gaza. The fact of the matter is that what has happened to Palestinians is absolutely disgusting. And none of these international laws or whatever the hell you're talking about change the matter of fact that it is illegal to move your population into the territory of another people. These are just workarounds that Israelis have been trying to find for years on end. Sure, I don't have an exact response to exactly what you're saying, but fundamentally, Palestinians were still dispossessed under the UN convention. I can't remember which one it is, but they have the right of return. And the fact of the matter is that they are continually denied by the Israeli regime that has inflicted and created an apartheid regime over Palestine and has made life untenable there for Palestinians continually. And this idea of, oh, well, Israel just won wars, it doesn't assuage the fact of, well, Israel is still a settler colony that was always hell-bent on doing this stuff and was aided and abetted at every step by Western governments.
It was always so they're the ones who accepted the partition plan. They accepted.
Yeah, of course they did. Ben-Gurion openly said, we'll accept whatever we can get because we'll just take more. He said, we'll just take more. This is something in Tom Segev, the first Israelis, and also readily available in The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. This is all stuff that's there.
Ilan Pappé is a complete
for God's sake, this is just nonsense.
No.
This is nonsense.
No, it's
this
not.
is nonsense,
No,
history revealed. There's a reason he's respected in the academy, and you are a disgusting racist.
Okay, I'm just gonna come in a second. You guys have got just over 20 minutes left. I just thought I'd let you know it's gone by very quickly. Yeah. So I'll let you guys continue, but 22 minutes left technically.
Okay, thanks for that. So, yeah, Ilan Pappé is respected by no one other than other communists and postmodernists, both of which he's happy to say that he is. He openly says he doesn't care about history and that he only cares about narrative. The historian Ephraim Karsh showed very well that, by the way, I'm sympathetic to what happened to the Palestinians, and I'm sympathetic because they have the most atrocious leaders, and the Arab world has the most atrocious leaders. So, like I said, the historian Ephraim Karsh shows that in the war between 1947 and 1949, first the civil war in the British Mandate and then the war with the rest of the Arab countries, the responsibility for the Arab refugees was almost entirely the Arabs' fault. They repeatedly... What's so funny, Chris?
Because it's just ridiculous, history revealed. Israel ethnically cleansed these people. There's records of them doing it. And you want to bring up one Israeli historian who only ever gets published in the Journal of Israel Studies or whatever it is. This is just, oh, well, Ilan Pappé said this thing about how he views history. He's talking most likely about your kind of history where you just pick
based on facts and primary sources.
Essentialist history where it's like, oh, this thing happened, so we know this about now and we can construct about the present. That's not quite how it works. And I know what Pappé is probably talking about there is something more akin to that rather than I don't care about history. Because if you did know what Ilan Pappé actually was, in 1948, along with another group of in 1970s maybe, along with another group of Israeli historians, including Tom Segev, Avi Shleim, and I can't remember the others, they basically said, no, Israel's been lying about what happened in 1948 and the rhetoric is wrong. They used the Israeli archives and they found all of these things. And also, the fact of the matter is, history revealed,
I've got to respond.
The dispossession of the Palestinians existed long before. And this is proved in a book called Colonizing Palestine by Arij Sabakhuri, which came out this year. She looked at the fact of the matter of the diaries of the Israelis who'd come there and the Zionists who'd settled that land. And they showed full well that the Zionists had the intention of taking the land. It's present in almost all of their rhetoric. Now,
no. You've spoken for ages.
Let's let history respond for a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, those historians have been completely disproved by Ephraim Karsh, who shows exactly how they use sources incorrectly. They like to claim that Ben Gurion said we had a plan to expel the Arabs. He never claimed that. They make all sorts of ludicrous claims. What Karsh shows, and you can look at this in places like Jaffa and Haifa, for the most part, the Arabs fled of their own accord for a variety of reasons. The wealthy would flee to protect their wealth. Others would flee thinking that the Arab armies would invade and just kick out the Jews, and then they'd be able to come back. And this is what I'm talking about with the atrocious leadership that the Palestinians have. They've been promised the world by their leaders that we'll kick out the Jews, we're going to destroy them, and each time they lose. Now, I'd also like to point out that lots of people like to claim that, the hatred between Jews and Arabs or Jews and Muslims is a result of Zionism. The Islamic anti-Semitism is centuries old. Even in what was then Ottoman Palestine, there were Arab massacres of Jews, like in Safed in 1834. And we can look all over the Arab world and Islamic world even larger to see appalling massacres and discriminatory laws. I'll tell you what, whoever's watching, they probably don't know that under Islamic rule in various places, Jews and also Christians were called dhimmis. They were second-class citizens. They had to pay a special tax called the jizya, and it was specifically designed to humiliate them, to make it clear that they are beneath Muslims. There were certain laws that applied to Jews and Christians that didn't apply to Muslims. Now, in Germany, in the 1930s, Jews were famous for wearing yellow stars to mark themselves out as Jews. Wearing a yellow symbol on clothing did not start in Germany to identify Jews. It started in the Islamic world. The history of this goes so far back, and that hatred of Muslims for Jews goes back centuries, and it is still going on today.
It's not the same thing, history revealed. There's a much better wealth of literature which talks about the fact of actually modern day Islamophobes are much more similar to the anti-Semites of the past who spoke about this thing. An obsession with sort of Jewish sexual nature and orientalization of they speak about the Jewess in particular, of how people would be incredibly racist towards the Jewish father, but they would obsess over the Jewish beautiful woman who needed to be saved. And this is actually a trope that's very much present in Islamophobia, because it's like, oh, there's this disgusting male in Islam who we need to rescue the women from. So this idea that the two are just the same is once again your problematic version of history, you were like, this thing happened, and this means that this is now. Granted, there were all of these horrible things going on, but the point is they don't represent Palestine now. This was an empire that existed in a previous time. What the pro-Palestinian movement is hoping for is something better, and to not live in a world where people are classed as different kind of citizens, where they are forced to not move freely, where they have different laws applied to them. But that's what you want in Palestine. So as much as you frequently bring this up, it's very clear that it's nothing more than a stick to beat Arabs and Muslims with, as opposed to actually being like, well, this thing happened. Because the track from what happened in whenever these massacres, whatever point in history you want to point at, is not just the same. You have to understand that Jewish immigration to historic Palestine provoked apocalyptic nationalism. You keep saying that the leaders were really bad. Yeah, you're right. For example, the Mufti, he was horrendous, but he was appointed by Ronald Storrs, the British. They appointed him. People in Palestine didn't just all love the Mufti and follow him. They had their own opinions. I mean, I don't think you actually know how many people followed him at the time. There were people who followed him, but do you not blame people? Hang on. As I said earlier, referring back to Britain and how we are now obsessive over immigration, can you not understand how a society in the 1920s or 30s descended into apocalyptic nationalism on the basis of, hang on a second, people are coming here, they're kicking us off our land, they're actually taking our jobs, and they are making life difficult here, all at the behest of a colonial power. And yet in your worldview, that's just removed, and Palestinians are all at fault because the other Arab nations launched war. Do you not see that the basic principle of those Palestinians, that they didn't want to live in a two-state where they were lost what was historically theirs? They didn't want that, so why do they have to have that? Why do they have to? Why?
Right. Do I understand why they descended into the nationalism that they did? Absolutely I do. Because people like the Mufti, and he had a very sympathetic audience, he was a fascist Nazi sympathizer. In case people don't know, the Mufti was implicated in the Nuremberg trials. He went to Bosnia to work with the Third Reich to recruit Bosnian Muslims to the Bosnian SS. He recruited 20,000 Muslims who served in the Bosnian SS, who slaughtered Jews and others all over the Balkans. So, yes, I can understand why they did it. This was the ideology that they were being fed, that they were sympathizing with.
Because they were reacting to people coming to their land, history revealed. That's the part that you just removed. You think that these people are just backwards Arabs.
Okay, you're monologuing again. Right. They're ideologically motivated. There was at that time it was more on the nationalistic side than the Islamic side. Obviously, the Mufti was a religious figure, but that religious ideology, which has spanned for centuries, and I'm really pleased you brought up sort of the treatment of women, by the way, Chris, and you said like Islamic anti-Semitism and how it views Jewish women, because women have been the target of jihadi violence for centuries, and this is not new. Like, particularly female slaves and European slaves were frequently the targets of Islamic entities from the beginning of Islam. When the Berber general Tariq invaded Spain, when he was addressing his troops, one of the great promises he gave them and the motivating things he gave them is, look at all the beautiful women who are waiting for you in Spain, who are there for you to enslave. And this carried on. People don't know this, but the southern coast of Europe was threatened for centuries by the Barbary states of North Africa, who would go and steal Christians. They would enslave them. And what was a particular type of slave they loved? They loved European women because they were extremely valuable to be sold as sex slaves in harems. This ideology that despises Jews, that wants to enslave Christians, exists to this day. It has not gone away. And the various groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, are the modern iterations of them. Now, they might not have sort of slaves in the same way, although there's very credible reports of the Houthis being involved in slavery. They certainly have many child soldiers.
From the Saudi government.
Not from the Saudi government, from various...
It is. The slavery one is. The child soldiers not. Slavery one is. It's from the Saudi government.
Okay, let's move on from that. There are other reports as well. But,
from the Saudi government.
Okay, keep saying Saudi government. Whatever.
Well, history. Let's
no.
Oh,
I haven't finished. I haven't finished.
Mr. Reveal.
Chris, come on, behave yourself. I mean, look what happened to the female slaves, hostages. As Agam Goldstein is her name. Reports of I can't go into detail because we'll almost certainly get the thing taken down. The sexual assault and rape that took place.
History.
Do we not believe her?
I mean, personally, I do not believe anything that comes out of the Israeli state. I mean, I don't trust it.
From one of the hostages.
Hold on.
From one of the
believe
hostages.
that sexual violence could have occurred, but anyone who's been around the Israeli state, I'm afraid, sorry, no, I just don't believe it.
Been around
Hold
it.
on.
You mean lived
been
in
around
it?
it? Yeah, been around their government officials and such.
God.
Anyway, let's go back to what you were saying. What you were talking about Muslims and women, it's inherently Orientalist. Because history revealed, men like you and I in the UK are constantly raping women. They're constantly brutalizing them, and we get away with it very frequently. There's very low conviction rates. If I wanted to, I could probably get away with sexually assaulting someone if I really so chose.
I'm glad you've thought about this so much. Is that because of our...
I mean... It's true. I don't think about it, history revealed. It's very much what happens when you look at the actual data about rapes and stuff. And this idea of, oh, well, Islam was the only religion like this. What about us? And what about our obsession with, for example, colonized women? What about the Americans and the Australians' obsession with raping indigenous people and raping the slaves that they took regularly and then producing children that they took away from the slaves and the Native Americans? And they said they're actually white. That is the same disgusting ideology which underpins what we are doing right now. Islam, on the other hand,
what we are doing right? What do you mean what we are doing right now? What are we doing?
What are we doing?
Now?
Running around the world and thinking we have a right to be policemen of it, thinking we have a right to go and preach to Muslims about how they treat women, when we as a society can't look after our own women.
You've got to be joking. The West.
Of course, it's worse in the Middle East.
God.
Of course, it's worse in the Middle East. History revealed.
Thank God.
Of course, it's worse in the Middle East. These are inherently less stable societies. But the truth of the matter is, if you actually listen to women, there have been 3 distinct feminist movements within the West.
They're inherently more misogynistic societies.
That's just not true, history revealed. They're not necessarily inherently more misogynistic because we're ostensibly more advanced and more stable, and we cannot abandon raping women. We cannot abandon abusing them. And yet you sit there and act as if, oh, well, that's just something Muslims do. No, it's not, history revealed. We ran around raping. American soldiers raped en masse in Afghanistan.
No, they did not. No, they did not.
They
did en masse. No, they did not. Yes, the hundreds of thousands of troops who were there, yes, they did occur. It did not happen en masse.
Didn't they even allow some, I saw an article about how they'd allowed like a local paedophile ring to rape like kids there as well. And they knew about it. So like this whole thing of, oh, look at the Muslims, they're doing the rapes.
They went to great lengths to both prevent sexual assaults, firstly by the Taliban and secondly by their Afghan allies. Speak to any American soldier.
Yeah, of course they did. Of course they did.
Speak to any
That's what they told you. Yeah, speak to the American soldiers.
Guys, I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. I'm going to interrupt for just a moment. You guys have got 8 minutes left, and I was thinking perhaps you might want to move toward a future-focused topic, perhaps about where can Israel and the Palestinian people move forward on this? What's the history? Are we going for, Chris mentioned at the very beginning, a binational solution? That's not something that I think many people talk about. Obviously, we can talk about one-state solution, two-state solution, or anything else. What has to occur on either side for these things to happen? History, do you want to happily on that?
First. So, sorry to be the pessimistic one, but there is little prospect of peace in the short term, probably the medium term as well. The thing that the Palestinians and also the wider Arab world have to do is abandon the dream of destroying Israel. It's not going to happen, and the more they try, the more damage there is going to be. Unfortunately, when you start wars, there will be many deaths. So they have to abandon that goal. And maybe sometime in the future, the surrounding countries can help be part of the solution. So perhaps Gaza could become a self-governing part of Egypt, or parts of the West Bank a self-governing part of Jordan. Other than that, I don't see it. But that's I think that's overly optimistic. I doubt that will happen. What's far more likely is the ideology is going to stay in place, and the dream of destroying Israel and driving the Jews into the sea will continue. So I think war is here to stay.
To be honest, I don't think that the Arabs or the Palestinians or anyone will have to destroy Israel. I think it's just going to do it itself. The country doesn't work fundamentally. You cannot be Jewish and a Jewish state that's democratic. Sorry, it simply doesn't work. And this idea that, oh, the Palestinians have pushed peace away. Literally just today, Benjamin Netanyahu said, yeah, there's going to be no Palestinian state. Continually says, I've prevented a Palestinian state. And that's not just in response to what's happening now. That's a very real thing that's been going on for years on end. The only way forward is to de-Zionize Israel and to stamp out the Zionist ideology, because it is inherently settler colonialist. It is inherently racist, as the UN declared in 1975 and eventually sadly repealed. But the fact of the matter is there will be no peace until the end of the settler colony. And that will come. Mark my words. It's just a matter of time, really. And that will bring about the fundamental peace in the Middle East and the existence of a binational state where both people can live together with free and equal rights. As I said to you earlier, South Africa is the model, and it's also the model for how not to do it incorrectly, where you cannot forget about these colonial privileges that were established by Israel and the settler colony.
Yeah, God, these colonial privileges. Yeah, equal Arab citizens with equal rights, but somehow there's colonial privileges.
How do you think that they have equal rights, history revealed? They can't. If a Palestinian who provably lived there is not allowed to return, fundamentally, that's not an equal right that any Jewish person can. How is that equal or fair? How is that equal?
Arab citizens of Israel have equal rights. They serve in the army.
No, they don't.
There are Arab soldiers.
No, they don't, history revealed.
Shut up a second. There are Arab soldiers, Arab Muslim soldiers in Gaza right now fighting Hamas on behalf of Israel.
I don't give a
aware
fuck
of that?
Yeah, of course there are. I don't care about.
Of course you don't. Of course you don't.
That's multiculturalism and identity politics.
Of course you don't, because it challenges your narrative.
No, it doesn't. History
Absolutely,
revealed.
It does.
The idea that
you have people volunteering to serve in the Israeli army, Arabs who.
Do you never think there have been collaborators in any other colony? Do you not think that there were Bantustan police in in South
Actually,
Africa.
I'm pleased.
Of course there
I'm
are.
pleased you did bring up actually other colonies, and this isn't a colony, but whatever. Actually, the British Empire, for the most part, had willing local support, but that's a completely different
No,
matter.
they didn't. History
Absolutely,
revealed.
they did.
No, they didn't.
Look,
History reveals.
look up the British Indian Army, the largest volunteer
Oh
army
God!
in world
But history revealed. You must understand that that has privileges for the locals there, who would have understood that they probably would have got a better existence from fighting in the army of the colonial power that was oppressing them. Because you sit here and act as if
Joined it.
This is kind
They
of
joined it.
multiculturalism. This is kind of multiculturalism and identity politics manifest. The idea that if there's a brown person or a black person or a gay person in a position of power, that somehow that will just progress society, or that really speaks about something, but it really doesn't. I prefer Fanon's approach,
Of course
which is
you
the
do.
idea. Hold up, you don't know fuck all about Fanon. You've never read
I know
Fanon.
plenty of Fanon.
You know that you know him through the reactionary lens of, oh, this guy's mad, this guy's mad.
He is a complete lunatic.
I don't think he was, history revealed. He lived in colonial Algeria. You're a sad 30-year-old white man who's racist and Islamophobic, so shut your mouth.
What are you? A sad, grubby student who loves terrorists?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe
exactly.
not
You admit it. You admit that.
I admit that I'm a grubby student, but I don't care about that. I don't have to sit here and have this self-belief that I'm better than other people, that I don't share similarities with other people because they're born in a different part of the world. It's simply not true. The truth of the matter is that you are a racist Orientalist who will never accept the fact that Palestinians have their own opinion. All you care about is justifying colonialism and making it seem as if actually the British
colonialism that.
Of course that's your reaction because you.
So, Chris, in history, you guys have got 2 to 3 minutes left. Do you guys
carry on for like 10, 15, or
it's up to you guys? History. Do you want to carry on?
We'll go on. Carry on another 10 minutes. Although I doubt he's going to say anything interesting.
Okay, so it's 3 minutes to 5. I'll stop you guys. I'll give you guys a 5-minute reminder at 5:05. So carry on.
So where this point comes down to is you essentialize and you create this racist Islamophobic worldview where Islam is the main problem for the West. But even in this worldview,
radical Islam.
I mean, no, you think Islam as a whole. Come on, admit it. You don't make the separation of radical, and you don't know anything about Islam, because surely you must know that, like, these groups don't even espouse the same ideology, that they're more motivated by a shared interest of not really liking the West as well. Because inherently, bombing, destroying countries, destabilizing them, preventing democracy, it doesn't make people happy. Because even in Iran, right, you say, oh, they're fundamentalists and stuff. But to be honest, the Iranian Revolution had its roots in a conflict between the bazaar, like the market and merchant class, and the Shah, but also it had roots in the fact that in the 1950s, Winston Churchill lobbied, eventually successfully, was it Roosevelt at that time? Probably, or maybe Eisenhower. Is there a change between the two? I don't know. But anyway, he lobbies one of them to get them to depose Mohammad Mossadegh.
No. Afraid not. The CIA had very little involvement in the Shah's deposing of Mohammad Mossadegh. It's a complete myth. Sorry to burst your bubble again.
Of course it is, history revealed.
Yeah, because America and the West are not responsible for everything. Iranians were perfectly capable of hating other Iranians and seeking to overthrow them. It was an open secret that the Shah wanted to overthrow Mossadegh, and the CIA had some involvement, a very small amount. But
some involvement is the problem. You shouldn't be doing that.
You shouldn't run around the country. It was going to happen one way or the other.
You shouldn't run around the world and help authoritarians get into power and innately do bad things. And you act as if the West doesn't do everything. No, that's because they act through their puppets like Saudi Arabia. But for example, take Bahrain. In 2013 or 2012 or 2011, Obama repeated rhetoric that the Iranians were profiting off unrest in Bahrain. This simply wasn't true. The protesters there wanted democracy. Their ideology was actually akin to the 2009 Green Revolution, or attempted one, inside Iran. And Saudi Arabia denied it, all with the help of the British as a backed state. And Obama said this stuff. And along with Philip Hammond, who I believe was the UK's ambassador to Bahrain, said it was on the right track after killing innocent people. Here is the core problem, or my contention with the West. It's not just some exoticized magical evil. It's the fact of the matter that it runs round the Middle East, destabilizing and preventing democracy and helping to give rise to these extremist groups. There's a massive link between the behavior of Saudi Arabia and also the pushing of political Islam by Western governments and the supporting of political Islamist movements, not just terrorist ones, but more generally, and the rise of radical Islam in recent years.
You done? Yeah. Okay. Like, I don't really see what Bahrain's got to do with anything. It's very unfortunate what happened there. Very hard to say whether that would have truly resulted in democracy. If we look in other places in the Arab Spring where there were uprisings, unfortunately, it didn't end in the way we would have wanted. And look what happened in Egypt, for example, where they did have democracy. And who did they elect? They elected the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamic fascist. Why is that bad?
That's not
Why
true.
is that
They're an
bad?
Islamic fascist organization.
Absolutely, they are.
Morsi was not a good prime minister, and Islam doesn't necessarily give you a way to go forward as just a political, as like a political program for the future. But the idea that Morsi is a fascist and the Muslim Brotherhood as a whole is ridiculous.
He was an Islamist. Morsi was absolutely an Islamist, and if he'd stayed in power longer, he was too busy fighting his internal enemies in Egypt. If he'd stayed in power longer, then almost certainly the peace treaty with Israel would have been ripped up, and there would have been more war.
I don't think it necessarily would have. I'm pretty confident I read an article talking about Morsi being pretty lukewarm on Israel. And more generally, he wouldn't want to forsake the relationships with America because it's too important to the Egyptian economy. So he probably would have just been some kind of moderate in power. There's no real idea that to show, oh, he was going to be an Islamic extremist. But there's the problem with your ideology. Anyone who espouses Islam of any kind is inherently a fundamentalist extremist, regardless of what they do, what they actually practice, and what the Muslim Brotherhood is in Egypt. You buy into this it's actually a Saudi spread narrative. Did you know that the Muslim Brotherhood are radical terrorists everywhere? Because they have different relationships depending on which country they're in, because it's not one homogenous bloc.
Okay, but we're talking about Egypt.
Yeah, exactly. And they weren't extremists there. There were extremists in the Muslim Brotherhood, don't get me wrong, but it's like any organization. There's always people who are more extreme than others. As much as I hate Israel and think that all Zionists are racist, it's very obvious that some of them are more racist than the other and believe in more disgusting things.
Okay, like political is a straw distinction. Sort of Islamism, that ideology, indeed does express itself in different ways in different places. You already said, like the Houthis had their local grievances in Yemen, which is why they emerged. But their ideology remains the same in the pursuit of violence and in the understanding that they are doing it in God's name. Read what these people say. They are take Hamas, for example. Let's find his name. What is it? Ghazi Hamad went on television and said, We are proud to say we are a nation of martyrs, and we are willing to sacrifice. We are willing to make these sacrifices. And we repeat October the 7th over and over again. Do you know about that one?
Yeah, I do. But Israel's been repeating October the 7th for 133 days. Okay. Like, I don't know what you want to say. It's like, as you opened your interview, you did the whole classic spiel of exoticize or make the violence seem more extreme by using emotive language when it comes to Hamas. But for Israel, no, they're actually really precise. They don't mean to kill people.
It didn't happen, did it? It didn't happen that they attacked a music festival, slaughtered young people, and paraded a girl's barely clothed corpse round Gaza whilst people screamed Allahu Akbar, cheered, and spat on her body. That didn't happen. That didn't happen, did it?
I mean, you're talking
about exoticizing, or you'd have to say orientalize. It was caught on camera.
But when did I deny that, history revealed? When did I deny that? The problem is that the same thing that you are talking about and you're so revulsed by right now, why don't you care when Israelis do that? Why don't you care about the videos of their soldiers like jamming sticks in the eyes of dead bodies? Why don't you care about the monthly, it's gone really blurry. Why don't you care about the yearly march where they all chant death to Arabs about Palestinians? Why don't you care about any of these things? It's like, I know October the 7th happened, but you want it to be that I think it didn't happen, that I'm some kind of crazy person. But the thing is I know it happened.
I'm not saying you did not.
You just did.
I'm asking, okay, I asked, did you see it in a rhetorical sense? Because the way you're describing, sort of trying to characterize my views, is that somehow I've got this sort of perception based on nothing really, based on a stereotype.
Based on all your videos.
Based on what we saw. Based on what we saw, what they gladly filmed themselves doing.
Yeah, Israeli soldiers have done the same thing. I don't understand
Israeli soldiers have not paraded...
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. Yes, they have. I promise you. There are videos
Listen. They have not paraded Arab corpses in the streets of Israeli cities whilst people have cheered and spat on them.
No, they've done it in Telegram instead, where they share the videos of them like abusing dead bodies, and Israelis clap and they cheer as they watch a mother picking up bits of their sons. It's very funny because again,
And what
it's
happened?
this
And
thing.
if they do, I don't know what you're talking about, but
Just to let you guys know, you're at 5 minutes left.
okay, if they do those things, they have their own internal procedures which punish people who do.
No,
these
they
things.
don't.
Yes, they do. Just
What
as-
about Shireen? What about Shireen Abu Akleh? Why was nothing ever done
okay,
about that?
enough. You
A
want
soldier intentionally fucking killed her.
Okay, all right. I'm going to finish. Just as the British Army does, just as the American Army does. When you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in an army, the people will break the rules. You have internal mechanisms to discipline them.
Yeah, there's a really good internal mechanism actually where in the 1980s, Israelis were well aware. Ariel Sharon said to Morris Draper, you're not going to save those Palestinians in the Sabra and Shatila camps. And Ariel Sharon was also well aware that, I can't remember who the leader of the Phalangists was. He says he was trying to make the decision.
Of course you don't
hold
know.
on.
Of course
Hold
you
on.
don't know.
What? Because I don't know some fucking leader of the Phalangist name.
But you
History
know Al
revealed.
Sharon. You're happy.
Pardon?
You know him. You don't.
Yeah, because the Phalangists were aligned with Israel. Why would I know the name? Ariel Sharon's a much bigger figure than some random
Why?
general
Because
of the Phalangists.
because they carried out the massacre.
Because Israel watched them and Ariel Sharon knew that it was happening. This isn't some pro-Palestinian talking point, history revealed. Israel had to launch its own investigation because its own civilians were so disgusted about what they did. And even they thought that it didn't go far enough.
What they didn't do.
Well, to be honest, I think it's just as bad as an army watching people getting raped and killed for 2 days to then sit there on the outside and just watch it. That's just as bad, history revealed, as actually perpetrating it yourself. If the British Army had done that, well, I think that they actually have in some scenarios. I think in Sudan,
where have they done that?
I think in Sudan, the United Nations did it a little bit, but I don't actually know the answer to that. I think they enclosed all their compounds. But anyway, what I'm talking about here is history revealed. The fact of the matter is no one really faced discipline for that. Ariel Sharon lost his job and then ended up becoming the Prime Minister of Israel. So, like, you say that there's these internal disciplinary procedures.
Well, he wasn't.
Where are they for Shireen?
Ariel Sharon wasn't a soldier.
No, he was the general.
No, he was the defense minister. He was a
Okay,
he was a civilian politician.
So, what of it? He was heavily
What of
involved
it? You're
in
just
and he
talking
knew,
about
he knew.
soldiers.
History revealed. He was the one who knew. He said to Morris Draper, who was an American diplomat, I believe.
You brought up the point about soldiers being disciplined and then give an example of a guy who's not a soldier.
Because he's the one who matters the most. You're drawing a pointless comparison here. Ariel Sharon is the defense minister. That's the man whose opinion matters more than a random soldier. It's not the gotcha point that you think it is. This man knew that the Phalangists were going to kill and rape Palestinians, and he let them do it. That's the problem, history revealed. You found like this point where you're like,
they had the investigation and they got rid of him.
And then he became the prime minister.
20 years later.
Yeah, no way. You should be in prison. If there are hundreds, I think some people estimate 800. If there are 800 people murdered on your watch and you knew that was going to happen, it shouldn't just be...
Whatever.
Okay, I'm not mischaracterizing it. This is all provable.
Mischaracterizing it.
No, it's not. This is all in the work of preventing Palestine around 270 to 290.
So Chris and History Revealed, you guys have 2 minutes left. Okay. Do you want to continue or would you like to do closing statements?
I don't mind.
Up to History Revealed.
I don't mind, we'll continue.
Do another 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we'll add it on. I'll let you guys know when you've got 5 minutes left.
But yeah, it's just this point. There's no mischaracterization. Sharon knew, they watched it, a Norwegian independent organization, or maybe just a Norwegian guy working for some independent organization in Lebanon, saw the Israeli soldiers watching bulldozers dig mass graves for the Palestinians. There's no ambiguity about it. They watched it. Sharon knew what was going to happen. They even fired flares in the air so the Phalangists could see what they were doing. But yet you act as if, well, he got a real disciplinary for that. The defense minister, who knew that was going to happen, he got away with it. He got away with it. But you say 20 years later, if that happens on your watch and you allowed anything like that to happen, you should rot in prison forever. That's 800 innocent people who were killed because of you.
I was not denying for 1 second it was a tragedy. But what you had there was something that you couldn't discipline Sharon for because, first of all, the Christian militia, the Phalangists, were not under his command. They were allied to Israel. They should have stopped them. I agree. But they didn't. And in terms of responsibility, the commission that looked at it decided he was indirectly responsible, understanding he couldn't be directly responsible because they weren't under his command to stop.
Give me a second. Keep talking, History Revealed.
I don't want to get hung up on one massacre in Lebanon, given so
Because it's such a horrendous
because
thing.
so many took place in Lebanon. So many took place. Do you know how many of the Palestinians massacred in Lebanon?
Nowhere near the amount that Israel killed. I think it was around 20,000.
Well, Israel didn't massacre 20,000 people in Lebanon, but whatever.
Let me just quickly.
In case people don't know, the background of the Lebanon war, the reason, as in the Lebanese civil war, the reason Lebanon descended into civil war is because the PLO, Yasser Arafat, tried to take over Jordan. They tried to take over Jordan, and more Palestinians were killed in that process. It's called Black September, than years of fighting with Israel, killed by the king of Jordan. And then what did Yasser Arafat do, this corrupt, lifelong terrorist? Having been kicked out of Jordan, he decides to go and destabilize an already fairly unstable country of Lebanon. And the balance between Christians, Sunni Muslims, and Shia Muslims. Lebanon descends into civil war, and you have Christians fighting Sunni Muslims, fighting Shia Muslims, and the PLO are involved. The PLO carried out plenty of massacres against the
But nothing on the scale of Sabra and Shatir. Let me just read to you.
Yes, there was on the scale
Morris
of Sabra and
Draper
Shatir.
warned
No. You're not getting away with that one. Yes, on the scale of Sabra and Shatir.
Okay, where? When?
I'll get you do whilst you're reading. I'll get you the name of the massacre.
Draper warned Sharon that this prolonged presence would enable the Lebanese to go and kill the Palestinians in the camps. Sharon replied, "So we'll kill them. They will not be left there. You are not going to save them. You are not going to save these groups of the international terrorism." And then Sharon declared, "We are not interested in saving any of these people. If you don't want the Lebanese to kill them, we will kill them." This is Sharon's quotes from page 220 by Preventing Palestine. That's just not like, oh, he was a little bit complicit. The motherfucker knew what they were going to do, down to a T. Down to a T. There is nothing that excuses what happened at all. But yeah, of course, for you, it's, oh, actually, Israel have these really great procedures to review stuff. No, they don't. They just love to get away with crimes. Shireen was killed for no reason. They lied about it. They then said, oh, it was this, it was that. And then they eventually admitted. And what happened? Nothing. Nothing.
Okay.
So
she was on a battlefield.
No, she wasn't.
She wasn't. Okay.
She was in Jenin, mate. It's just disgusting.
What was going on in Jenin?
Nothing that justifies killing a woman wearing a press vest by shooting her there at the intersection between her helmet and her body. So you think that Shireen deserved to die, basically?
No, I don't. Before you start going down, no,
you do.
Don't.
You said it was in a battlefield, so that just happens. So Shireen deserved that, I assume.
What, people don't get killed on battlefields?
Not press en masse like Israel somehow manages to. Why were they all shot at the Great March of Return? Why were so many?
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the Great March of Return.
History. This isn't just a thing.
You
brought it
up. You brought it up.
You clearly have. You clearly have a list of talking points in front of you.
So I'll answer. The Great March of Return, for people who don't know, people call it a protest. In Gaza, there is no protests. Hamas is a brutal dictatorship. There is no freedom of assembly. What happened to the Great March of Return, as they call it, of course, the return to what exactly? So what happened there was Hamas either facilitated or allowed it to happen. You cannot assemble. And who was at the Great March of Return? A guy whose name you might be familiar with, Yahya Sinwar. And what did he tell people to do? He told them to go and talking about the Jews, he said, go in and cut out their hearts. Do you want to look that up?
Yeah, I do actually. But you know Sinwar didn't organize it, right? It was organized by a guy called Ahmed Abu Artema. And he organized it. And at first, you're right. Sorry, at first, you're completely wrong. It was independent of Hamas. It was independent of any of these organizations. Then eventually, Hamas endorsed it after a couple of weeks. Abu Artema does not believe in violence. People at the Great March of Return, they took place, they burnt tires, they threw things, but nothing will justify. I think one of the statistics that I saw is 28,000 people wounded, hundreds killed, most of them maimed in ways that are unrepairable. So they shot them through their femur, so it shattered the bone completely, and basically the only option is get rid of the leg at that point.
Like I said, they didn't have to organize it. There's no freedom of assembly. If it went ahead with their permission.
But no. You can look that up.
That's how dictators.
You can look up what Abu Artema said.
I'm not denying that. That's how dictatorships work. If he wanted to assemble, for example, to protest against Hamas, it's therefore not suiting them, they would have just arrested the people or beaten them like they like to do. But they approved it, so they let it go ahead.
A week later, they endorsed it, mate. They
No,
let it go ahead,
I'm not talking about
but they couldn't
endorsement.
have stopped it anyway. There were like 20, 30,000. Hamas don't have the power to stop that. Their power's been waning for a long time over the civilian population.
They are quite happy to shoot their own civilians when it suits them. It does not bother
Yeah,
them.
but history
And
reveals,
arrest them
so are Israel.
and torture them.
So are Israel. So are Israel, bro. They killed their own hostages holding white flags. And they killed how many on October the 7th as well by themselves?
Okay, and why did they kill their own hostages holding white flags? I'll explain. Because Hamas frequently uses civilians, well, sorry, not uses civilians, has its own members dressed as civilians. You've seen that?
Yeah, I saw the Israelis doing that in the hospital. Thank you. That's a good point.
Oh my god. Okay, that's not a battlefield. The same rules don't apply. In Gaza, they frequently have their operatives dressed as civilians, and they have faked surrenders before.
Yeah, of course. Israel's definitely not just killing random people with a white flag. That's why there's videos of them doing it.
So what they'll do, and
you guys are at 4 minutes left, by the way.
Numerous people have reported on this. They'll have weapons caches in buildings, and they'll fire the weapons from the buildings. And bear in mind, they're dressed as civilians, drop the weapons, walk out with their hands up, pretend to be civilians, walk into the next building where another weapons cache is, and fire from there.
Really, it sounds amazing. It definitely came from the Israeli military, so no faith in it.
And just about every military analyst covering
just about every military analyst. I don't care what military analysts have to say.
Of course you don't. Of course you don't.
I'm going to be honest.
I'm sure you don't.
The majority of them are just dog shit. The majority of them are dog shit. Like, they don't know anything. They don't say anything important. They're just pointless.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have military experience
because
or anything.
A lot of them work to whitewash the crimes of Israel because they also want to whitewash the crimes that we regularly commit overseas. You know, this isn't just a thing that Israel does where they're killing random people. You know, British soldiers have a penchant for killing randoms as well, you know.
No, they don't. They've got a penchant for killing terrorists and threats to this country. I wonder what happened to you that you despise your own country and its army so much.
People like you, history revealed, I'm afraid.
You've never met
poisonous racists and wicked people who want to demonize Muslims and don't want to look for a better life. That's what ruined this country for me.
Demonize terrorists and protect freedom. Yeah, terrible.
What freedom do you protect though? Because you support Zionism, right? Which is a settler colonial apartheid state that infringes on the freedom of the Palestinians. You don't support freedom. You support your fascistic version of freedom where the West is best.
No, the West is definitely best.
How so? What's best about us? What do we do that's best?
What do we do that's best? The fact you have to even ask that compared to non-Western societies is genuinely incredible.
What do you think that we do so much better?
Freedom, prosperity. We could go on for a while.
But do we have freedom and prosperity? Where's Julian Assange right now? Where's the press freedom? Where's all of the things in our life that just clearly aren't working properly? Why is it that our societies can't seem to escape racism, bigotry, misogyny, all of these things?
Why? Because
free and wonderful.
Why? Because it's made up of humans, and humans are imperfect. Yet we still have managed to create far better societies than the non-Western ones.
But how is our society so much better?
I just explained
what's better about it? You just said those things, but you didn't really say anything tangibly that makes us better than them. And that's again going back to Orientalism.
Sure.
We are better.
So, take Iran for example. You know what happens to women in Iran if they don't follow the modesty rules?
Yeah, they may get attacked by the
religion. Yeah, by the morality piece, flogged, imprisoned.
Of course.
That doesn't happen to Western women, does it?
No, but our police officers rape and kill women, and we get involved in the beating. We like it a lot, don't we? People like you and I, history revealed, white men.
Now who's racist?
Not me. I don't care about saying white. I'll say black as well. The funny thing is you believe so much that you're like beyond racism. But the funny thing is you're more bought into identity politics than I am.
I'm not even
you're very woke when it comes to identity politics. You don't need to history revealed because you're constantly loving them through your videos. And you have this conception that we're so much better, but there's no reason to believe that we are so much better. Sure, certain things may be better, but this society is inherently more stable. We haven't run around and bombed people for about Europe hasn't been bombed in the same way, destroyed, destabilized as the rest of the Middle East has. And it really doesn't surprise me that a lot of these places have become more aggressive. And also you have to speak to the fact of, well, maybe what could have been? What could have been if the young people in Bahrain won? What would it be if Saudi Arabia wasn't the most reactionary state that won one colonial conquest and then has since been propped up by America and the West? What could the Middle East be? What could the freedom be of these people? Because that's my core problem, history revealed. These dictators don't just exist in vacuums. They tend to get a lot of love and support from us, history revealed.
We have a very good example of what could be. Lebanon was actually a decent country at one point. When it was a Christian majority country, they used to call Beirut the Paris of the Middle East, and actually Lebanon did have somewhat of a democratic system. That was until the PLO turned up. For people who don't know, by the way, and now Lebanon is well, hard to say really. I mean, it doesn't have any sovereignty in any real sense, because the most powerful force in the country is an Islamic extremist proxy of Iran. That's Hezbollah.
It's not a proxy, by the way. When you chastise me for using the word proxy, you were
Absolutely
right
a
about that.
proxy.
Chris, in
Absolutely
history-
a proxy.
Chris, in
Absolutely
history, we
a
have
proxy.
come to the end. Would you guys like to do a closing statement each?
Yeah,
Sure.
racism is wrong. We should all be nicer to each other. And history revealed, you need to learn that quick.
How about a minute each? How about that?
Okay.
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. It's just very obvious that this impasse can never be crossed, because on the one hand, you have a racist who has essentialized beliefs about Islam, the Middle East, and I do understand where some of those come from. The fact that there's worse freedoms of women, generally worse democracies, but I just don't believe that that's anything to do with them, that it's some essential characteristic of Muslims, of Arabs, of Islam, of any of these things. I believe that there are many other factors that go into it, and sadly, history revealed doesn't. He simply believes that people like us are just better than people like them. And I guess, to break that mindset, maybe he has to live around and meet some new people who aren't all white, who aren't all racist, and who maybe can think of something better or something freer.
Okay, history.
Yeah, I agree. We are at a total impasse when you have people in our society like Chris who have sort of have such masochism towards their own people and their own society, and love Islamic terrorists as much as he does, and happy to simp for them and justify the things they do. Oh, because of colonialism, because of this, that, and the other, and yeah. So I would really hope he actually learns what Islamic terrorism truly is, understands it ideologically, and actually learns a bit about the West. Learns that our freedoms are great, and that it would be a very nice thing if other people in the world, including in the Islamic world, could enjoy these freedoms as well. So I hope that Israel finishes this war, finishes off Hamas, and hopefully there is something towards a peace in the region, although I highly doubt it, because, as I've said before, this ideology and its sympathizers like Chris are going nowhere.
That was exactly 1 minute. I'm going to
Perfect.
hop on and say thank you both for coming along. I knew from the beginning that it was going to go on way longer than we initially arranged. But thank you both for your time. If you guys want to do this again, perhaps in the future, obviously I think you'd need a break in between this. We'll see what obviously happens and develops over the next probably weeks, months in Israel and the Palestine territories, and see what happens, and perhaps we can do another debate.
Can I ask something though? History revealed, did you have written out talking points in front of you the whole
No.
time? Did you have written out somethings? Because it seemed that way, that you were like flicking in between things.
No.
Okay. See you later, baby.
I think that ends there. Thank you both for coming.
History, remember, Nazism is wrong.
So is Islamic terrorism.